We are very excited to speak in person with longtime cybersecurity professional and self-attributed social media spy, Eliot Jardines. He is currently the treasurer of OSINT, the OSINT Foundation, among other roles, which we'll discuss. And I know there's many of them. So thanks for taking the journey to come up and visit with us today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. So first, what is OSINT?
So open source intelligence is publicly available information, right? So anybody, any member of the general public could get it through request, observation, or purchase.
Okay. So one of the reasons we contacted you because we needed an expert in OSINT. So I'm really curious how open source intelligence relates to some of your previous job titles.
So my first involvement with open source intelligence was as a intelligence analyst in the Army. And so I was an all source analyst. So that means we have different ways of collecting intelligence. So open source intelligence is one, right? Publicly available information. Signals intelligence is another. Human intelligence, the traditional spy craft. And then we have imagery intelligence, just interpreting photographs and geospatial data. And so an all source analyst combines all of those.
Wow. Okay.
And gets those feeds and then produces an all source product, right? Which is looking at everything we've got available and trying to put together a holistic or a complete answer to an intelligence question.
Okay. So how did you become an expert at this?
I got old. I got old. Expertise, you can get good at open source in probably 2 years. Probably 5 years, I would consider someone to be pretty senior. And then I would say a minimum of 10 years.
But isn't technology always changing and advancing? So how do you keep up with that and at the same time become an expert at it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So that's always a challenge because the rate, and other intelligence professionals, the technology may not change as often. But in open source, we have new tools that come online, new information sources every single day. And so the key thing is not so much what we would call buttonology, right? Learn, you press this button for this tool, and then you do this, and then you do this. It's understanding what the tool does, right? And then having the skills necessary so that regardless of what tool it is, right? A mechanic can have a super fancy piece of equipment or a mechanical piece of equipment that do the same thing. One is easier to work with, but they have a fundamental understanding of what needs to be done. And so, the tools change.
The information you're trying to get, exactly.
And the thing that attracts, you have to have, to be good at open source, you have to like that evolving, constant change. And then you have to think outside of the box a lot in terms of, right, because we're not collecting this information directly.
Right.
Right. We're using something that somebody else put up there. So you have to think very creatively about where, who might have a need for this information and where might they have put it, right? And so you're constantly searching. We were talking the other day about what makes a good OSINT practitioner. And I said, what you do is you pick a topic that doesn't exist on the internet and you have everybody start searching for it. And the person who gives up last, that's the best OSINT practitioner. Obviously, I'm kidding. But
how did you get interested in this field? Because, it's not like something you learn about in school.
Right.
Although, in a classroom setting, you might need to find information. We're not collecting information from various sources, as you said that you did.
Right. Yeah. So this was, when I first got started in open source, it was the 1990s. I'm afraid to say. And I got two things happened. One, I was in college and this professor made us all go get email addresses and this
In
internet
the
thing.
90s? What?
Yeah. And so we were, and all of the assignments he'd post there, and he'd make us use super rudimentary, super basic tools that existed in those days that don't even exist anymore. It was all text-based, and you had to write commands. And so I got conversant with, or I was able to use the technology, understand it a bit. And then the Army in those days kept hearing about this thing called open source intelligence, and they were trying to figure it out and how that applied to intelligence. And I was in an Army Reserve unit that happened to have expertise in this arena. And we were tasked with putting together a handbook for the Army.
Oh, wow.
And so that's how I got started in OSINT.
So do you have to like be a part of the military to be in this sort of like, information intelligence part, or to get good at OSINT?
So no, actually, it's done in a whole bunch of disciplines or career fields. Obviously the military is one, law enforcement is another. And then on the commercial side, there's a whole industry, right, that does things like we do open source intelligence to protect, right, a CEO, right, or a celebrity, right, to determine threats
what
against
can we
that.
find out about this person?
Right.
So what do the possible attackers
right
or know about the potential victim?
right or if you have a stalker who's constantly and if the celebrity is going to the hometown of this person who's stalking, then obviously you want to track that. And then in the business arena, it's done a lot for competitive intelligence, right? So if we're both selling donuts and right, and I think your prices are somehow way lower than mine, and I'm trying to figure out how that is, right? And I start doing research and I figure out, it's because she's getting her
do you send a spy in to see what type of flour I'm getting?
Right,
maybe
right,
it's
that kind of thing.
Maybe it's wholesale.
Right.
Do you hack my internet? Do you go that far?
So no, because so the one thing, all right, so OSINT is publicly available information, right? Request, observation, or purchase. So that's one part of the definition. The next part of the definition is it's used for an intelligence purpose, right? But that publicly available part of the definition is critical, because anything you put online is fair game.
Okay.
Right. So if it involves hacking, pretending I'm somebody else, and
basically accessing something I probably should not have access to.
Right. Then that's not open source.
Got it.
Right.
Okay,
so that's
no
more
hacking.
Right.
But I could go walk over there if I wanted to, right?
Right.
Okay.
I could observe, right? So I could send one of my guys to sit out back for days to figure out who sells you flour, right? And who sells you sugar and whatever, right? And then, so that's another area where open sources are used a lot. And then also in emergency management.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because people tweet, hey, my house is flooding. Hey, I really need help, right? And then we have commercial imagery, right? Which is commercial satellites who take photos, right? So if you've used Google Earth, right, that's a great example of open source, right? Because it's available and you can do streetscapes.
Oh, the street view is so helpful.
Yeah,
if I'm going someplace new and I want to know what it looks like,
right. Yeah.
I'm looking at the street.
And then, the other thing that's not a job, but a hobby, there are folks who are hobbyist OSINTers. And so there's an organization called Bellingcat.
Not heard of this one.
So it's BELLINGCAT, Bellingcat.
Okay.
And they were hobbyists who started doing open source research to figure out events that are happening overseas. And so they discovered a whole bunch of lies that are perpetrated by certain regimes, certain governments that are.
And people are doing this as a hobby?
Yeah, they're doing this as a hobby. And it's fascinating. And so,
Wow.
there's some great examples. When the Russians first invaded the Ukraine many years ago,
We're talking Crimea?
Yes,
Ukraine?
Crimea.
Okay.
Yeah. They shot down an airliner.
Right.
And so they denied that it was them. And the Bellingcat folks actually, by looking at webcams and traffic cams and whatnot, were able to figure out what vehicle shot the missile.
No way.
And then backtrack that. And they were able to locate, okay, this is the exact vehicle. It's a Russian vehicle, right? So how did it get here from Russia? And they went backwards day by day.
Wow.
And it helped that vehicle had some unique markings on it. But it was a Russian vehicle that was handed over to the separatists there in Crimea. And they shot it down thinking it was a Ukrainian Air Force jet. And they denied it, but it was irrefutable evidence.
Wow.
And then, in Syria, the regime used chemical weapons against its citizens. And so I believe they were able to do some research along that. And then, so a lot of these kind of world events where you have regimes who are lying about killing people or arresting
disinformation, misinformation. So this is a great tool to use to dispel a lot of that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Back to, because earlier you mentioned some skills needed to be successful and move forward. And one of them was, creativity. Another one was, you should be interested in wanting to face something different and face new technologies. What else would you say is like a trait that makes you really good at this sort of stuff?
Yeah. So, being tenacious, right? So, which is a fancy word for saying not willing to give up quickly on things, because it's a lot of trial and error. You have to have a natural curiosity. You have to have an interest in the world, right? So the vast majority of open source information about the rest of the world, strangely enough, is not in English.
Right.
And so a language skill helps tremendously. So because, the conversation you and I are having can be translated with computer software. But if you read that, it wouldn't be a whole lot of fun, and I think it's Jimmy Fallon does this skit on his show where he takes song lyrics to popular songs and translates them into.
I have not seen this.
Oh, it's hilarious.
I have not seen this.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And so they'll use Google Translate, and they'll translate the lyrics from English to some other language, and then they'll translate it back.
Oh,
right? And
yeah.
It is hilarious, what it comes up with. And you're like, how in the world did we go from this sentence to what comes out?
So you really need people who are experienced and have, a variety of skills even.
Right. So, that language is important. And then just an understanding of the history and whatnot of a particular area. So if young folks have an interest in a particular part of the world, right, the more they read about it and the more they stay current with what's going on, it's a lot easier then to be able to decide truth from fiction, right, which is a major part of what we do.
Okay, so our episode today is focused on somewhat discussing social media and its involvement in OSINT. We've kind of touched on it a little bit, but it's also about, ubiquitous connectivity, which is basically how all of our devices are constantly connected, and they're connected in various ways. And they're connected in a way that allows social media to access our data. What kind of data are we sharing? Is it, maybe it's inadvertent? Maybe I don't mean to share it. So can you give some insight on that?
Yeah. So when we get a TikTok account or a link, or not a LinkedIn, that's a professional thing, but
Instagram is
Instagram, right?
popular.
Yeah. With this, I'm trying to think of age.
We got an Instagram now in cyber chat.
Yeah. Good. Right. You sign, right. You agree with
A privacy policy,
right.
essentially.
And one of the major revenue streams for these companies is selling information about you.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so everything that you're doing is building a profile. And so there are a few things, right? We ought to be careful with what's in the background.
Yeah.
Right. So as an open source in the career field in the government is OSO, an open source officer.
Okay.
So our bread and butter, right, is what else is in the picture, right? Because that might tell me where you're located, right?
Like the pictures you share on your social.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if you're in your room, right, and you think you're anonymous posting something, but in the background are all your certificates or your trophies for this, that, or the other thing, we can.
This is my school that gave me this award,
right.
or I got this from a club that's local.
And so then we can zoom in, right, and we can use software to help. If it's too fuzzy to read, we can improve that a bit. So that's one thing, right? And then when you take a picture with a smartphone, it now adds geotags, the coordinates of that precise location. And so you have to be careful in your settings that you don't have that location turned on, right? So a good example is there's a Russian tourist, a kind of
chubby
fat guy like me. He was actually even chubbier in a Speedo, which is just offensive.
Yes.
And, he was posing on the beach. Well, behind him were Russian anti-aircraft battery, of the whole system. And so he had that location geotagged. Right. And whether this is true or not, I don't know. I haven't seen the information. I haven't talked to the Ukrainians, but it has been widely reported in the media that the tourists took that picture and then that site was bombed, right, by the Ukrainians to take out that piece of equipment. So that happens a lot. So you have to be very careful, right? If you're doing any kind of interactions on social media, Instagram and whatnot, that you ensure that geolocation is turned off.
But even then, and I'll continue using this example with Russian soldiers using their phones, because it is widely noted that has been a problem for them,
right?
Because they continue using them, and I don't know who is getting the information from their accounts, but it seems that is being used to help target them. So can you explain a little bit how that's happening? Because even if you're a soldier and you take a picture and it's devastated behind you, or there's a just plain building, how can they still find your information? Other than the exact coordinates. What if they take those off? Is there still another way?
Yeah. So if you're taking pictures of and you turn that off, and there are landmarks that are visible, right, then you can Google, for example, has I forgot what it's called, but you can go in and compare. You can upload a photo and
Google Images.
Thank you. And show. We have automated tools, and so I don't use that too often. But right, and so it will show you
similar
images,
photos,
and so then that's that whatever it happens to be, right, that mountain side or that particular building or that monument has has something unique, and so the other thing is you start doing detailed analysis. There's a group of hobbyists who were trying to track somebody. And this person took a picture of where he was, and he was wanted.
Okay.
And they figured out it was Canada. right? Just based on what was around.
Okay.
And so, well, they had an idea it was in Canada. And then, okay, well, we know he's in Canada. Where in Canada? Well, they looked and there was a street light, and that street light was only used in one place in Canada.
What?
And they researched it and figured out that it was, let's say it's Montreal, and Montreal has these street lights that aren't common anywhere else in Canada, that they have their own street lights. And so they figured that out.
So that's one way to kind of narrow it down a lot.
Yeah. And then they had a bunch of volunteers. And so they literally, with that photograph, they went to Google Earth, the street view, and started virtually walking down every single street. And boom, because they had a whole bunch of people doing it.
Oh, cool.
Right. So there's that kind of crowdsourced.
Yeah. Because like every street is basically digitized.
Yes. And so, they just walked, they assigned orders to people, and
that's really fun.
So, yeah. So, and then, the other way that people get found is something called ad tech, which is advertising technology. It's what it's short for. And what happens is we all have cell phones, right? And that cell phone has a unique subscriber ID. So it's not your phone number, right? But your SIM card, the little card that allows you to make phone calls, has a unique number. The
card that you get when you go and you register for your phone plan.
Yeah, that little card that you stick, little chip that you stick in there. And so that early on was used for advertising, right? So I use Waze, right, to get from point A to point B. That's how I got here.
Okay.
Right. And if I stopped at a stoplight, it will show me ads for restaurants or whatever that are right there. Right. And there might be a discount. Hey, we're running and how does it know that? Because it's tracking that location. Right. And they sell that location data to vendors. And so when you download an app, any kind of app, you want to go in and turn off in your settings the permissions for that app to have.
And you have to do access. That with every single
one.
Yeah.
So depending on whether you have an Apple or
Android,
the settings are different. But and so in my phone, it says like I can block it. I can allow them to use the locational data only when I use it, or turn it on. And so nothing I have is set to, just unlimited tracking.
Right.
But so all that data is collected. So it won't say this is Eliot Jardines' phone number. It doesn't sell the phone number, and it doesn't sell my name. But
so it doesn't personally identify you.
Well,
in a way,
that data that's sold, no.
Yeah.
But then I can put that together. That's called aggregation, right? I can aggregate that data. And so if I have access to ad tech data, I can layer it with a map. And I go to Google and I say, I wonder where he lives. And I type in the person's name, and then, you see addresses, right? So then you have my home address. And then you go into the map and you draw a box. That's called geofencing.
Okay.
Right. So we're drawing a box around that house, and then boop, it's going to tell you all the subscriber ID numbers. Right. And so, well, if I've got kids, they go, right. You're going to see these subscriber ID numbers go to a school.
Because they're all associated with your address. Right.
Right.
Okay.
And so, so if I've got 2 kids and a wife, and 2 of them go to schools, and then one goes someplace else, and then one goes to my office, it's pretty easy to figure out which one.
Who is who.
Right.
And who's doing what.
Right. And so that data is available for as long as I've had that phone.
For as long as you've had the phone?
Yes. Right.
So who has that data? Is it on your It's not on your phone.
No, because
It's the applications that are storing that information.
Yes,
right?
and the phone companies.
Okay.
Right. So, you have a phone, and many times a second, it's pinging the local cell towers. Right. And it says, hey, here I am. Do you have any messages for me? Do you have any phone calls for me?
Right. Yeah.
That's how it knows. That's how your phone rings. Right.
Yeah.
And so that constant, many times a second, hey, I'm here. I'm here.
Constant communication.
Right.
Okay.
Then it's a footprint of everywhere you've been, everywhere you've gone. Right. And so the software, if it's sophisticated enough, will let you see previous days. And then you say, well, what if I got rid of my cell phone a year ago? Okay, well, then let's say today's the 20th, right?
Yeah.
So let's go back to January 20th of 2022. And I'm going to draw that box again. And my new number isn't there, but there's a unique ID that's older, right? So if there were 4 numbers,
yeah, 4
right? And
once again,
this is my new one, right?
Yeah.
So I go back until I see 4, and this number disappears. So then I figure out which of these 4
who is
Eliot,
who again? Yeah.
Right? And then I can go back for as long as they've had that the previous phone. And so I don't remember what the exact date is, how far we can go back, but it's a number of years.
Wow.
So the data is there, and it's advertising data, but it's being used by lots and lots of people.
Is it really that dangerous that it's being shared? Let's put it that way. Because from a company's perspective, they're able to, sell you things, but it could, as they say, well, we want, the customers to have a great experience. And you mentioned how you used Waze to get here and give you ads from at a stoplight, where you could go. I mean, isn't that beneficial?
Yeah. And so, this kind of geolocational data, right?
Yeah.
Being able to fix someone's location on the earth can be super helpful, right? But we've got to be careful in how we use that and understand, right, who uses this information and what are they using it for? Because
we're talking about the companies that have the information, right?
Right.
Not like random hackers that somehow
Right. And so, it's commercially available data, so people can buy it. And some companies are very rigorous in who they'll sell that data to, and others
So
don't
some
care.
of this data is open source to a degree.
Because you can purchase it, right? So if the public can purchase the data, then it's open source.
Okay.
And so, so it can be used pretty effectively. Where you run into trouble is when that company sells the data to a broker.
Okay.
And then that broker
sells the middle person.
Right.
And
and they'll sell it to anybody. Right. And so now you gave Instagram the permission to use your data because
we signed the privacy policy,
right? But you don't know that they turn around and sell it to 25 other companies.
Exactly.
And so TikTok is a great example of the kind of threat, the real life threat, right, that exists.
Let's get into TikTok because that is one of my specific questions. So since the last time we spoke initially, there have been a lot of state governments and organizations that have put in place measures to prevent employees from even having accounts and using TikTok. And I feel like even between the time we film this and the time that this airs, that there might be more restrictions. So what is the reason behind this? Is it really that concerning? Because a lot of people are thinking well, so what if China has this? Is that really a big deal?
Yeah, so it's a big deal for a number of reasons, right? So one of the things is TikTok, right, has a connection with the Chinese government, right? So that's well established, and that's why the federal government has banned it. A lot of state governments are banning it, and in fact, a lot of universities now are blocking it. I just read an article yesterday,
literally yesterday.
Yeah,
I was perfect.
Yeah, about this.
Eliot about
this. Yeah, and so. One of the concerns is why the Chinese government is collecting this data.
Yeah.
Right. So, and it's not a matter of them just collecting your information, right? If you pull up the user agreement of TikTok and you go through, what the user agreement says is you give us permission to, right, track this kind of data and all of the other settings on your phone, all of the other applications, right? So we're going to find out, right? You're giving us permission to capture any data about what other things you have on that phone, right? Then you're also giving us permission to map out your network, right? So if you're at home, then it will start to collect data on what
other
kind
devices are connecting
well,
to
what kind of network do you have?
Oh.
And then what are all of the other devices that are here, right? So what are the printers, right? What's mom's computer? What's dad's computer? What's your brother's computer, right? Is the refrigerator internet
connected? Is there a robot?
Right.
Is there a home security system?
Right. So all of that data, and why? Why do you need that data? Right.
Yeah, that's not necessary because I just want to share my dance videos.
Correct. And so, right, that's right. So if you're the kid of a government employee, that government employee may be blocked from using TikTok, but TikTok is still downloading lots and lots of information, right, that could be used against your dad or your mom or your uncle or your whatever.
Whoever's related or whoever's on that network.
In that. Yeah. And so that's a problem, right? This collection of data. The other concern is TikTok in China is very different in terms of the algorithms used to show you what
different videos.
Right. And so in China, there's a limited amount of time you can use the tool.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it times out after, I don't remember how many hours, but it's like 2 or 3 per day.
This sounds familiar now. Yes. Yes.
And then what is shown to you, right? If you're under, I think it's 14, there are only a few categories. You don't see those dance videos. You don't see, right, all that trashy content. You see educational.
There's only certain categories that are allowed to be shown.
Right. And then
this is very 1984.
Yeah. And then the opposite holds true, right, with what outside of China, what you see. You see, right, the disinformation, right? So the anti-whatever it happens to be, right? And
false information.
Yeah, conspiracy theories and very negative content. Right. Inappropriate content.
Yeah.
And so, right, that's an active effort on the part of the Chinese government to, right, undermine Western democracies, because the advantage is, right, you live in a free society where you can see all this stuff.
Right. You have access to it.
Right. And so
it's open source.
Right. They're taking advantage of that, and their algorithms present things that are not the kind of things that are going to help you be a better person, right, or further your education, right? Quite the opposite. And that's a concerted effort, not just by the Chinese, but by the Russians, right, by a whole host of nations that are against democratic values, right? It's not just the U.S., it's just, right, the focus is anti-democracy.
So in a different direction, and I loved all that information about TikTok, and I think it'll be super helpful to a lot of people listening, because that sort of detailed conversation is not something that's happening on, a quick news outlet or for a sound bite, right? But one of my favorite OSINT tools is Google. Mm-hmm. And Google just knows so much, and it sometimes knows what you don't know, and it knows what way more than you want to know. We talked earlier about Google Images, so I was playing with that before we talked today, and it's a tool that it can also let you find websites for any picture that you enter, right? Mm-hmm. Like the original website, among other things. From a privacy standpoint, how do we look at these sort of open source tools? because so one of the things I'd played around with was I put a picture of myself with a running bib. And so basically has my running number on it on my shirt. And a bunch of other pictures came up of other people and their running bibs. And for those of you who don't know, if you can identify the race, which is often on the little thing that you pin on your shirt, and you have the number, you can find who you are, where you're from, among other things. Some races give more information than others. So like, how do you think about, open source tools from like a privacy standpoint? Is it a violation in some ways to have a lot of these, openly available tools? Because I don't want people to be like, they randomly came across my picture on the web. Like, what?
Yeah. And so, a long-held or a long-established legal principle is if you're out in public, you have no expectation of privacy, right? So if you're out in these races and whatnot, and
on the street,
then that's open and fair game. You can take pictures, you can take video. A lot of times there are people who will video and somebody will walk by and say, you're not allowed to use my footage, delete that. And no, that's not how this works. All right. If I'm on private property, that's a different story. But if I'm on the sidewalk filming, runners going by
in the street or whatever.
Right. And so, careful what you post and then who you tag in those posts. Right. And this goes not only for kids, but for parents, right? We're all very proud of everything our kids do, but there are things that maybe, because once it's out on the internet, it could be there forever, right? Chances are. And so, as young people, we all did stupid things, right? But I grew up in the previous millennia, and that stuff wasn't around, right? So there are no videos of
it's not documented on the web, because there was no web.
Because it was, right? Because there wasn't. We were rubbing sticks together to make fire, right? But that's a whole different reality today. And so, right. Once we start, my concern is more in putting all this information together. And and so the less information you put out there, the better you are, right? And so a few years ago, Facebook was they'd have these cute little, what kind of personality are you? And then what kind of this or that?
But I think some people still do that stuff.
Yeah. And so they'll ask some pretty interesting questions in there.
What was your first animal as a kid?
Yes, right. And then and so a lot of those are actually password recovery prompt kind of questions.
For sure.
Right. And so, so a lot of times you're giving away data that, it's kind of like when you drive by and you'll see a minivan, right? And it's got Bob, Susie, Johnny, and then kids, right? So you see the parents and they have their names,
their little pictures,
right? And then
on the back.
And then the little pictures and the names of each kid, and then the name of the cat or the dog or whatever. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah, that's so detailed.
That's data nobody needs to know. No stranger should be able to look at a car and call your kid by their name.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
Are there risks to using OSINT tools, though, do you think?
Sure. One of the things we teach professionals in the intelligence community is the whole point of doing open source intelligence is to get information, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're leaving more information than you're getting, then that's bad, right? And so you leave breadcrumbs when you use the internet, right? So if I go to visit a website from my home computer and it doesn't have any kind of protection, right? I have an IP address that's specific to that computer,
right? That's
assigned by the network. And so if I visit a website, that the webmaster of that website has access to all of the IP addresses, the unique addresses of everybody.
Sometimes it gives like your location too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Very detailed.
Yeah. And so down to what town you're in.
Yeah.
And so, right, as professionals, we have to be very careful, right, that and we go to great lengths to ensure that we're not broadcasting to the bad guys, right, that we don't know this or that we're looking for this, right, or that topic, whatever it happens to be. And so, you have to be careful, again, with what information you're giving out, because that can be tied to a physical location. And you think there are plenty of folks who have been abusing other folks online.
Yeah. And
they get found, and they get found for these very reasons, because they're not careful in how they go out on the internet.
Eliot, thanks for sharing all this awesome information with us today. Is there any last things you want to share, I guess, to prevent your information from being shared out there? Any last words or tips that you would give to our listeners?
Yeah. So again, check your settings, right? So don't give, right? They don't need your geolocational data to function many times. Be careful what you post. Think about what you post before you put it on there. And then just in general, keep in mind that anything that you post could be available for the rest of your life. And so what you think is hilarious at 13, 14, the 35-year-old you is not going to think. Just like the 7, if we posted a bunch of stuff that you did when you were 7 to the internet, you probably at 14 wouldn't think that that's something
amusing at all.
And so, and then, parents as well. So I'd encourage kids, have a conversation, right? Mom, I don't want you to put my stuff up there.
Yeah.
Right. Because, and that's a valid reason.
It's a valid request.
Right. And it's hard not to as a parent, because we're so proud, but, so that would be the thing, right? Keep in mind, and then be careful where you go, because you can't unsee some things. Right. And so that's a risk in our career field, is the psychological impact of what we're seeing. And so if maybe you're curious about the situation in Ukraine, you could see some horrendous photographs and videos right away, right? You don't need to see that. You don't want to see that. And so just be careful.
Thanks again so much.
Sure.
Those were awesome tips that you shared, and great information in general. Stay tuned, everyone, for a video of Eliot and I, and we are going to show you how to hack this week's episode challenge. So come back and join us.